everyone, welcome back to this episode of the Breast Cancer Physio. I'm your host Jen McKenzie, lymphedema physiotherapist and ESSA accredited exercise physiologist. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about a really common problem that hits a lot of people after they've finished their breast cancer treatment, and that is how to start exercising after you finish breast cancer treatment but you have lost your motivation. So without further ado, let's get into this video. If you like this content and you would like to see more, then please subscribe to my channel, which is completely free. Give this video a big thumbs up and leave a comment in the section below. I'd love to hear what topics around breast cancer you'd like more information on. So first of all, let's just talk about the fact that when you go through breast cancer treatment, often it's a survival period. So going through surgery and then chemotherapy and radiation, a lot of the time people sort of, stumble their way through as best as they can. You might not be eating as well as you should be. You might not be exercising much. You might not be exercising at all. It all depends on how your experience pans out. But then when treatment finishes, the large majority of people are most likely going to appreciate the idea that they probably should get back into exercise at some point, and ideally some point soon. But the problem is that a lot of people lack serious motivation to get back into exercise. It's not that they don't want to do it, it's just that the lack of motivation seriously overwhelms them to the point where they just feel they can't get started. So if you're feeling this, ladies and gents, please be reassured that you're not alone. It's a really, really common problem, and hopefully through this video you're going to get some great tips on how you can break through that mental rut and start to get back into exercise in a much easier way than you probably think you can actually do it. I think that one of the biggest issues when people finish their breast cancer treatment, whatever that treatment might be, is that first of all, their immune system has been shot to pieces. So that's a big player in why you're feeling really flat. You of course lack energy because the treatments have hit you hard from a fatigue perspective. And if you're lacking energy, it's really hard to feel like bouncing out of bed and going and doing an exercise session. But then thirdly, it's this emotional fatigue and this mental fatigue that also hits you. So, there's good reasons that people know they should be exercising, but mentally it's like they can't bring themselves to actually do it, even though they know it's going to be good for them. So here are my top 6 tips for how you can break the mental rut of trying to get back into exercise when you're lacking motivation after breast cancer treatment has just finished. One of the most important things I'm going to say in this video is this point here. Your first exercise session that you do is the hardest session you're going to do. And the reason I say that is because when you go from not exercising and having this mental block about getting started with exercise, the hardest thing to do is to make the decision to do your first session of exercise. So the good news here, guys, is that the first exercise session you're going to do is going to be the hardest one, but that also means that the next ones are going to come easier. So if you can just break that cycle of not exercising and then get started with some exercise, you will find that the mental barrier starts to drop in terms of your motivation to do the exercise. Okay, so here's tip number 1 on how to break the cycle of not exercising when you lack motivation after breast cancer. Tip number 1 is set the bar as psychologically low as possible. So what I mean by this is, when people think about exercising after breast cancer treatment's finished, they have this vision of basically running a marathon. And I'm not talking about even warming up for the marathon. They just think that they have to be going like down a really hard road where there's, sweat and tears and snot pouring out your nose and your eyeballs are bulging and your heart's pounding and you can barely catch your breath. That's what people visualize when they think exercise. But what I want you to start thinking about is the idea that you can start exercise in the most basic way possible. So if exercise can be started in the lowest possible way, which means that psychologically and from a motivational perspective, it's almost like you don't need motivation to do this task, then that's one of the best things you can do. So as an example, your first session of exercise might be to walk 10 times to your letterbox and back. It might be to walk around the block. It might be to do like a 10-minute session of yoga. It might be to get into a pool for 20 minutes and just do some walking laps or some squats or some calf raises. So set your bar so low that you then basically turn around and go, oh my gosh, that would be so easy to do. I could probably do more than that. Yeah, let's start low. So don't set your bar so high that you can't even get started. If you say to yourself, oh, I really should get to the gym 5 times this week. Yep, I'm going to do that. I'm going to go to the gym 5 times and that'll get me back into exercise. That might just be way too much. It might even be too much to go to a boot camp with a girlfriend, to start off with. It's really got to be so low to break that cycle of low motivation and not exercising that it's almost ridiculous. So really set your goal when you first start very low, and that's a really great way to get you moving. Tip number 2 is don't break a sweat. So what I mean by this is, like I said about that visualization before, people think about getting back into exercise and just their immediate go-to thought is it's going to be too hard and too intense. So when you do your first few exercise sessions, I actually want you to deliberately make sure you don't even break a sweat. So this might be a basic yoga class. It might be a walk around the block in the coolest part of the day. It might be walking back and forth from your letterbox 10 times, like we said before. So, and the other thing I should mention before I forget too, is that one of the basic exercise programs that I've done a video on previously and I've alluded to in other videos is this one here, which is upper body strength exercises after breast cancer. You can do that program in an air-conditioned room inside your house and you won't break a sweat when you first start doing that activity. So I want you to make this exercise of exercising as simple as possible, including not breaking a sweat when you first start. Now, of course, I'm not saying that you should never sweat when you exercise, far from it. Sweating through exercise is probably a good sign that you're increasing your intensity. But what I'm trying to pitch here is that you can start so pleasantly with some version of exercise that you're almost tricking your brain into the idea that you are starting exercise, which is a really good way to go when you're lacking motivation. Sweating is totally fine as you get your mojo back and you start to want to increase your intensity, because that's another thing I can just about guarantee is when you start and you get a few sessions under your belt, you'll actually feel really, really good about what you've achieved, and the exercise will release endorphins, which is going to help make you feel good. Endorphins are your happy hormones, and that way you'll be more motivated to do another exercise session. So sweating is just going to happen as a natural progression anyway. Tip number 3 is when you first start exercising, don't do more than a couple of sessions a week for the first few weeks. The reason I say this is, like I alluded to before, if you say to yourself, right, this week I'm going to go out and start training for that Tough Mudder event, I'm going to do 5 sessions at the gym Monday through to Friday. Yep, that's what I'm going to do. What will happen is you'll start to embark on some sort of intense program. You'll get a couple of days in and you'll just flick it because it's too overwhelming. You might even just pull up too sore from the exercise. So make sure that whatever you're going to embark on from an exercise perspective is actually sustainable, because if you set the bar too high too early, you'll potentially fail. And particularly the soreness part, guys, I can't emphasize enough that when you come off the end of finishing breast cancer treatment, whatever that may be for you, often people have lost a lot of muscle tone, a lot of muscle strength. They might be really stiff in some areas of their body, like their rib cage and their shoulder. And that means that when you first start exercising, you might get a little bit sore. So if you go really hard out at exercise when you first start, you're going to pull up really sore. So make sure that your frequency is low when you first get into exercise. And this is another way to make it not too overwhelming when you first start. Tip number 4 is make sure your progressions are small. So if you've walked to your letterbox 10 times as your first tick of the box, what I would say then is don't then go, awesome, I did the letterbox 10 times, now I'm going to run around the block as fast as I can go. So what you want to make sure of is that if you've done level 1, just go to level 2. Don't go from level 1 to level 10, because increasing your exercise intensity, frequency, volume too suddenly is also another way that you can overwhelm yourself, get really sore and flick it before you've even really got started. So if you're doing, say, resistance training, which includes weights, barbells, dumbbells, cable machines, whatever sort of resistance equipment you've got available. Just make sure that if you're progressing in your resistance exercises, that you're only going up 1 or 2 kilos at a time. This is also really, really good for helping prevent the onset of lymphedema, because unfortunately the other fact of life is that if you get back into exercise too quickly, too suddenly, particularly too intensely after you've had breast cancer treatment, you might find that you can trigger lymphedema. I don't see it happen very often, but it can happen. So definitely make your progressions really small, particularly when you're first starting. And it might be that if you've just walked 5Ks, you might want to walk 5.2Ks or 5.5Ks. Don't go from 5 to 10. So don't double your volume, just add little bits and pieces at a time. If you've gone to an acro aerobics class, and you've fared pretty well, don't do 4 in a week, just do a couple in the week and slowly progress. Tip number 5 is just put your shoes on. You know, when you lack motivation to do exercise and your brain is really, really good at coming up with every excuse under the sun as to why you shouldn't exercise. Oh, I've got to wash my hair later. Oh, I've got to pick the kids up, so I probably I won't fit that in. Oh, I've really got to do that paperwork. Oh, I'm just too tired. No, I might go and have lunch first before I exercise. Yeah, I'll have lunch. So your brain can come up with excuse after excuse as to why it shouldn't exercise. One of the best tips I can give you guys is don't think, do. So what this essentially means is stop thinking about why you shouldn't be exercising and put your shoes on. As soon as you've got your walking shoes on or running shoes on or gym shoes on, whatever shoes are going to basically allow you to do some exercise, you're pretty much there. So instead of thinking, put your shoes on, and you will find that naturally, it's time to get moving. So I think in that sense, walking is one of the best, easiest forms of exercise you can do. You don't need any equipment apart from a pair of shoes. And as long as you can walk safely in an area and it's not too hot or not too cold and the weather's okay, generally speaking, you should be able to find a time during your week where you can at least get walking. We will talk about high quality, what constitutes high quality exercise in another video, but essentially if we're really just trying to break this rut of not being able to exercise because of low motivation, find the first easiest thing you can potentially do, and walking is a great way to start. So just get your shoes on. Tip number 6 is set yourself a short-term goal. So one of the best things that can motivate people when they're feeling a lack of motivation is a deadline. So sometimes people will go, oh, I've really got to get something going here. But because there's no time parameter or no deadline for them to actually get started, sometimes that date can get pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. So one of the ways some of my breast cancer patients really love getting started is going into a charity run or a charity walk. So there's a set date for that event, and then they just reverse engineer their program. So we basically work backwards, we see where they're at when they're starting, and we work towards that goal. And that's a really, really good way to go. Now, you don't have to aim for a charity race as your goal. You might be aiming to walk 10 times to your letterbox twice a week for 2 weeks. As I said in my first point, you need to set your own bar at your own levels, and that may be so psychologically low for you that it seems ridiculous that you're starting that low. But if you know that it's so low that you can achieve it easily, you can tick that box, and then you can set yourself another tiny little progression up from there. That is a fantastic way to get the ball rolling, because at the end of the day, all we're trying to do here is we're not trying to change why you should exercise or how you should exercise necessarily. It's changing the way you think about how you're going to exercise, which is basically making it as simple as possible for you. And everyone's going to have their own sort of experience with breast cancer. They're going to have their own exercise history. So some people might have been going to the gym 6 days a week before their breast cancer hit. Some people might have carried on with gym through their breast cancer. Some people might have never exercised in their lives before breast cancer came along. And then some people might already be thinking about starting exercise but are just really unsure how to do it. So tip number 6 is set yourself a goal, but make sure it is tailored to you. So make sure the goal is really specific to what you can and can't do at the moment. It may be something like that you're aiming to run 5 kilometers, but in 6 months' time. You know, it doesn't really matter what your goal is, as long as it's specific to you and it means something to you, and you generally put a deadline on it. So put a date on when you want to achieve it, and that way it will generally happen. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys. I hope you've gained some really good information on how you can start to exercise after breast cancer when you're lacking motivation. I'll be back next Tuesday with another video. I hope you're having a fantastic week wherever you are. Remember to leave a comment in the section below, subscribe to my channel, and if you like this video, give it a big thumbs up. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Jen McKenzie, the Breast Cancer Physio, and I will see you next time.